He left the backpack on the lawn. The sun was just peeking over the rooftops when Mason bent down to adjust the straps on his son's bag. The fabric was worn from months of hospital visits and school runs, the blue canvas faded and the bright yellow zippers dulled by wear. For just a moment, the world felt still. Peaceful. Then came that voice, sharp, arrogant, unmistakable. "No backpacks on the lawn," barked the man with a voice like gravel soaked in vinegar. Mason straightened and turned, blinking into the light. There he was, Curtis Holbrook, president of the Oak Ridge HOA board. White polo shirt tucked too tightly into khakis, clipboard clutched like a weapon. The man who fined a single mother for having a jack-o'-lantern on her porch in mid-November. Who lodged anonymous complaints about unsightly mobility devices near front steps. The kind of guy who'd weaponize order in the name of appearances. Before Mason could get a word out, Curtis marched across the grass. His sneakers crunched the early frost as he reached down and, without pause or permission, yanked the backpack from Mason's hands. "Hey!" Mason shouted, standing up fast. "That's my son's." But Curtis had already unzipped it. In one swift motion, he pulled out the compact, softly glowing device inside. It was polished metal the size of a grapefruit, pulsing gently with a rhythmic hum. The mechanical heart. Custom-built, lightweight, one of only a handful like it. The only thing keeping 12-year-old Daniel alive with his severe congenital heart condition. "Jesus," Mason gasped. "Put that down? Now." Curtis held it up like contraband. "What the hell is this? Some kind of gadget? A prank?" "It's a medical device," Mason roared. "It's my son's artificial heart. He can't live without it, you moron." Curtis scoffed, shaking his head. "Maybe don't leave your toys lying around other people's property." And before Mason could move, before anyone could stop him, Curtis wound up and hurled the heart toward the curb. The device struck concrete with a sickening crunch. Metal twisted. Wires snapped. The hum died. Daniel, who had been sitting quietly on the porch steps, pale, thin, so fragile, let out a small gasp. His fingers clawed at the wood beneath him, his lips already paling. "Dad," he whispered. "It feels weird." Mason dropped beside him in an instant, checking for a pulse. His son's heartbeat was faltering, his breath shallow. Mason looked up and saw the neighbor watching, some clutching coffee, others holding their phones. A few filming. Nobody moved. Nobody helped. Nobody said a word. Curtis crossed his arms, smug. "Maybe next time try following the rules. This isn't your personal yard sale." Mason fumbled for the backup unit in his coat pocket, a temporary emergency pump meant for transport, not survival. With trembling hands, he clipped it to the small port on Daniel's side. His son flinched. The crowd didn't speak. Curtis continued to drone on about bylaws and aesthetics, completely oblivious or maybe just indifferento, the boy suffocating on his own porch. That was the moment Mason realized this wasn't ignorance. It wasn't an accident. This was cruelty dressed as order. A life threatened for the sake of a lawn regulation. The ambulance arrived in 6 minutes. But to Mason, it may as well have been a lifetime. 6 minutes of holding his son as he slipped deeper into unconsciousness. 6 minutes of silence louder than any siren. Daniel blacked out 2 minutes before the EMTs arrived. His lips had already gone gray. His body cold and trembling. The emergency backup had only 30 minutes of charge at best. It was designed to buy time, not save a life. A paramedic named Zoe climbed out of the rig. She saw the shattered heart on the pavement and winced. "How long has he been on backup?" 8 minutes, Mason said, voice shaking. She exchanged a look with her partner. "We need to go. Now." Inside the ambulance, Mason gripped his son's hand. "Stay with me, buddy. You're going to be okay. Daddy's right here. You're going to live." He didn't realize he was crying until Zoe handed him gauze and said, "Sir, you're bleeding." It wasn't his blood. It was Daniel's. By the time they reached the ER, Daniel had stopped responding to touch. His vitals were crashing. A trauma team was already waiting. They cut away his clothes, barked out orders, rushed 4 lines. Mason tried to follow, but someone held him back. He caught a glimpse his son's chest rising weakly before the trauma bay doors slammed shut. He stood there in the white hallway, covered in his child's blood, shaking and silent. Then came the doctor. Tall, wiry, face tight with urgency. "We need a replacement unit. Model AXSR. His internal ports are failing. We've got 20 minutes or we lose him. Do you have one? Not on site. It's specialized. Private order only. The fastest we can get one is by courier. It costs $100,000 up front. Mason blinked. He'd already emptied his retirement last year for the original unit. Insurance had denied it, called it experimental. Behind the doctor, nurses rushed by. One wheeled a crash cart streaked with blood. Then he saw her. Natalie, his wife, turn the corner. Her eyes found his. Her face crumbled. She didn't have to speak. He already knew the answer. They didn't have the money. And unless something changed, they wouldn't have their son either. Mason didn't go home. Didn't eat. Didn't sleep. He paced the hospital parking lot all night, fury boiling in his chest. By morning, he stood outside the Oak Ridge HOA office. And he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Lucas Vance, ex-Marine, civil rights attorney, a man known for blowing doors open literally and figuratively. Lucas carried a thick folder labeled Intent to File Federal. They walked into the building like a storm. Curtis Holbrook sat at the front desk, as smug as ever, sipping coffee, wearing a cardigan embroidered with the HOA logo. Lucas dropped the folder with a thud that made everyone flinch. "You're being served," he said calmly. Curtis blinked. "Served for what?" Mason stepped forward. "You destroyed a life-saving medical device. That's not a code violation. That's attempted murder." Curtis started to laugh until Lucas slid a still frame across the table. Curtis mid-throw, the heart unit airborne. His smile vanished. Inside the folder, ER reports. HOA complaints going back years. Paramedic statements. And the kicker, security cam footage from a neighbor's doorbell synced perfectly with Daniel's gasp. "This goes to district court today," Lucas said. "Federal court by Friday." The news exploded. By noon, the video hit Instagram. By 1, it was on Facebook. By 2, it ran on local news, side by side with photos of Daniel in the ICU. HOA president destroys child's artificial heart. Millions watched. And Curtis Holbrook became the most hated man on the internet. But Mason didn't care about views. He wanted justice. 2 days later, police arrived at Curtis's door with a warrant. No cuffs, but he finally understood. This wasn't going away. In court, Curtis sat pale and speechless. Mason told the truth. About moving into Oak Ridge for the schools. About getting fined for a wheelchair ramp, for a swing set, for flowers that were too bright. "This wasn't a citation," Mason said. "This was an assault." He told the jury about holding his son in that ambulance, not knowing if he'd live. About being asked if he had $100,000 on the spot. Because a man thought a backpack on a lawn was an eyesore. The courtroom was still. Then came the verdict. On felony assault, guilty. On destruction of medical equipment, guilty. On obstruction of emergency care, guilty. Curtis was sentenced to 12 years in state custody. The remaining board members, those who signed off on the so-called visual obstruction policy, were sentenced to community service at pediatric hospitals. But it wasn't just about punishment. The civil court awarded the Callahan family $2.4 million in damages, not as a reward, but as recognition of what was lost. And the world didn't forget. Within weeks, the story was everywhere. Families came forward. Stories poured out. Petitions surged. And then came the Chase Act, named for Daniel's real last name. A sweeping bill to rein in HOA power, prohibit discrimination against medical needs, and demand oversight. The movement grew. And one day, on live television, Daniel Callahan sat in a blazer beside his father. A mechanical heart unit gently pulsing beneath his shirt. "I don't want revenge," he said. "I just want to make sure no one else loses their heart because someone thought rules mattered more than people." 1 year later, he stood at his graduation podium, black gown hanging off his small frame, voice steady. "What saved me," he said, "wasn't what was in my chest. It was the people who fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself." And when he held up that red backpack, stitched with one word, freedom, every person in that room rose to their feet. Because Daniel didn't just survive. He changed the world.